Dr. Sarah Chun wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished stitching the last wound on the injured HFY soldier. The medical bay of the diplomatic station hummed with activity, alien medical equipment blinking in patterns that still confused her after 6 months of working here. She had volunteered for this assignment because someone had to be the first human medic to work alongside alien species in neutral space. The HFY soldier, a reptilian being with scales that shifted from green to blue when he was in pain, clicked his gratitude in his native tongue. Sarah had learned enough of the language to understand basic medical terminology and expressions of thanks. She patted his shoulder gently, careful not to press too hard on his injury. "Rest now," she said in broken HFY. "Healing will come with time." The soldier's eyes, large and golden, looked at her with what she had learned was their equivalent of a smile. His scales shifted to a warmer orange color, indicating contentment. Sarah had discovered that working with alien physiology was like solving puzzles every day. Each species had different reactions to pain, different healing processes, and different ways of showing emotion. As she cleaned her instruments, the medical bay doors hissed open. Commander Veltar strode in, his massive frame filling the doorway. The Velnari were one of the most powerful species in this sector of the galaxy, standing nearly 8 feet tall, with thick, armor-like skin and forearms. Veltar commanded the security forces on the station, and Sarah had learned to respect his direct manner of speaking. "Human medic," Veltar said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "The Matriarch requires your presence immediately." Sarah felt her stomach drop. The Matriarch was the supreme leader of the Velnari, a being so powerful that even the other alien species spoke of her in whispered tones. She had arrived on the station 3 days ago for crucial peace negotiations between several warring species. Sarah had only seen her from a distance, surrounded by guards and advisors. "Is someone injured?" Sarah asked, already reaching for her medical bag. "Not yet," Veltar replied, his 4 eyes narrowing. "But there may be soon. The Matriarch's companion is ill. Our healers cannot determine the cause. She has requested that the human medic examine the creature." Sarah's hands paused on her medical bag. She had heard whispers about the Matriarch's companion from other station personnel. It was some kind of predator that the Matriarch had bonded with as a child, now grown to massive size. The other species gave it a wide berth, and even the Velnari guards seemed nervous around it. "What kind of creature is it?" Sarah asked. Veltar's expression grew even more serious. "A shadow maw. They are apex predators from our homeworld. This one has been the Matriarch's companion for 30 years. It is protective of her." Sarah had read about shadow maws in the xenobiology database. They were described as intelligent predators with razor-sharp claws, acidic saliva, and the ability to move faster than most beings could track. The database also noted that they were extremely territorial and had never been successfully domesticated by any species other than the Velnari, and even then, only in rare cases. "Commander, I'm honored by the Matriarch's request, but I'm not a veterinarian. I specialize in humanoid physiology." "The Matriarch specifically requested you," Veltar said. "She has observed your work with different species. She believes your approach to medicine might succeed where ours has failed." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The Matriarch had been watching her work? She tried to process this information while considering the implications of refusing the request. On one hand, attempting to treat an unknown alien predator seemed like professional suicide. On the other hand, refusing the Matriarch's direct request might damage the fragile diplomatic relationships that everyone on the station was working to build. "What are the symptoms?" she asked, settling into her professional mindset. "The creature will not eat. It remains motionless for hours at a time. Its coloring has changed from the normal deep purple to a sickly gray. Our healers believe it may be dying." Sarah nodded slowly. Those symptoms could indicate anything from poisoning to a psychological condition to a simple infection. Without knowing the creature's normal physiology, diagnosis would be nearly impossible. But she had built her career on taking calculated risks and thinking outside conventional medical approaches. "I'll need access to detailed physiological data on shadow moths," she said finally. "Already prepared," Veltar replied, producing a datapad. "The Matriarch anticipated your requirements." Sarah took the datapad and quickly scanned the information. Shadow moths were even more formidable than she had imagined. They possessed redundant organs, accelerated healing abilities, and a nervous system that processed information at superhuman speeds. Their emotional attachment to their bonded partner was described as absolute loyalty that could last their entire lives, which typically spanned over a century. "How long has the creature been showing these symptoms?" she asked. "Since we arrived on the station." The Matriarch believes the change in environment may be affecting her companion, but she cannot risk leaving during these negotiations. The peace talks are too important. Sarah understood the weight of the situation. The peace negotiations involved 6 different species that had been at war for decades. If they failed, entire star systems could be destroyed in the resulting conflicts. The Matriarch couldn't abandon her responsibilities, even for her beloved companion. "I'll do it," Sarah said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "But I'll need complete freedom to conduct my examination without interference." Veltar's 4 eyes widened slightly. "The Shadow Maw does not allow strangers near. Even our healers must be restrained while the creature is sedated." "Then we'll have to find another way," Sarah replied. "Forcing the examination will only add stress to an already sick animal. That could make the condition worse." She spent the next hour reviewing everything available about Shadow Maw physiology and behavior. The creatures were described as highly intelligent, capable of complex problem-solving and emotional reasoning. They formed bonds not just through proximity, but through what the Velnari called trust-proving, a series of actions that demonstrated worthiness as a companion. As she prepared her medical equipment, Sarah found herself thinking about her own motivations. She had come to this station because she wanted to prove that human medical knowledge could contribute to galactic healthcare. Earth was still considered a backwater planet by most galactic standards, and humans were often dismissed as primitive newcomers to the cosmic community. But Sarah had always believed that human medicine's strength lay not in advanced technology, but in adaptability and compassion. Human doctors had learned to treat patients from every conceivable background and circumstance throughout their history. If she could successfully treat the Matriarch's companion, it might open doors for other human medical professionals throughout the galaxy. The walk to the Matriarch's quarters felt longer than usual. The station's corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, filled with the quiet hum of life support systems and the occasional whisper of conversation between alien species. Sarah passed groups of delegates from different worlds, their various forms and features reminding her of the incredible diversity of life in the universe. When they reached the Matriarch's quarters, Sarah was struck by the heavy security presence. Velnari guards stood at attention every few meters, their weapons clearly visible. The atmosphere was tense, as if everyone was expecting trouble. The doors to the quarters slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a spacious room that had been modified to accommodate both diplomatic functions and the needs of a large predator. One section contained elegant furniture suitable for conducting negotiations, while another area had been set up as a habitat with natural materials from the Velnari homeworld. In the center of the habitat area lay the Shadow Maw. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The creature was massive, easily the size of a large Earth lion, but with a sleek, elongated build that suggested incredible speed and agility. Its fur was indeed a sickly gray color instead of the rich purple described in the files. But what struck her most was the intelligence in its eyes as it looked directly at her. The Matriarch rose from where she had been sitting beside her companion. She was even more imposing up close, her presence filling the room with an almost tangible authority. Her scales, darker and more intricate than those of the guards, seemed to shift and change patterns as she moved. "Human medic," the Matriarch said in perfect standard galactic. I'm grateful for your willingness to help. Sarah inclined her head respectfully. Your Excellence, I'll do everything in my power to determine what's wrong with your companion. The matriarch's gaze moved to the shadow maw, and Sarah could see genuine worry in her expression. Her name is Kira. She has been my constant companion since childhood. She is not merely a pet. She is family. Sarah approached slowly, keeping her movements calm and non-threatening. The shadow maw's head lifted slightly, tracking her movement with those intelligent eyes. Sarah could see the creature's nostrils flaring, taking in her scent and processing information about this new presence in her territory. Has she shown any interest in food or water since arriving? Sarah asked. She has taken small amounts of water, but no food. This is highly unusual. Shadow maws typically have robust appetites. Sarah knelt at a respectful distance from the creature, noting how Kira's breathing seemed slightly labored. The shadow maw's posture suggested discomfort rather than aggression, which gave Sarah hope that the condition might be treatable. May I approach her? Sarah asked. The matriarch looked surprised by the question. You wish to examine her without restraints? I believe she's more likely to cooperate if she doesn't feel threatened. Restraints would only add stress to her condition. The matriarch considered this for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Kira, she said in her native tongue, then switched to Standard Galactic. This healer wishes to help you feel better. To Sarah's amazement, the shadow maw's ears perked up slightly at the matriarch's words. The creature's gaze shifted between the matriarch and Sarah, as if processing the introduction. After a moment, Kira laid her head back down, but kept her eyes on Sarah, watching her every movement. Sarah began to move closer, one slow step at a time. She kept her hands visible and her posture relaxed, drawing on techniques she had learned for working with frightened patients. When she was about 3 feet away, the shadow maw lifted her head again, nostrils flaring. Easy, Kira, Sarah said softly. I just want to help you feel better. She held out her hand, palm up, allowing the creature to catch her scent. Kira's nose twitched, and, after a moment, she stretched her neck forward slightly, bringing her nose close to Sarah's outstretched hand. The touch was brief, just a quick sniff, but it was progress. Sarah remained perfectly still as Kira evaluated her, knowing that this first interaction would determine whether any examination was possible. After what felt like an eternity, Kira relaxed slightly, settling back in her resting position, but keeping her eyes on Sarah. The shadow maw's posture had shifted from alert wariness to cautious interest. She accepts your presence, the matriarch said, her voice containing a note of surprise. This is remarkable. She has not allowed any of our healers this close without sedation. Sarah felt a surge of cautious optimism. She knows I'm here to help. Animals often sense intention better than we realize. She began her examination from a distance, using visual assessment techniques to gather as much information as possible before attempting physical contact. Kira's breathing pattern suggested some kind of respiratory distress, and her gray coloring could indicate circulation problems or toxin exposure. Has she been exposed to anything new since arriving on the station? Sarah asked. The only change has been the environment itself. We brought samples of her usual food and water from our ship. Sarah considered this. Environmental stress could certainly cause the symptoms they were seeing, but there might be more specific triggers. The station used different atmosphere processing systems and lighting compared to a Velnari ship, and even subtle changes could affect a sensitive creature. As she continued her visual examination, Sarah noticed something else. Kira's posture suggested not just illness, but emotional distress. The creature kept glancing toward the door and windows, and her tail twitched in patterns that the database described as anxiety indicators. The negotiations, Sarah said suddenly. How long are they expected to last? Several more days, possibly weeks, the matriarch replied. Why do you ask? I think Kira might be experiencing separation anxiety combined with environmental stress. In human medicine, We sometimes see similar conditions in patients who are removed from familiar environments for extended periods. The matriarch's expression grew thoughtful. You believe her illness is psychological as well as physical? The physical symptoms could be manifestations of emotional distress. If she's been your constant companion for 30 years, being confined to these quarters while you conduct negotiations elsewhere might be causing significant stress. Sarah slowly reached into her medical bag and withdrew a simple diagnostic scanner. Kira's eyes tracked the device, but she didn't show signs of alarm. Encouraged, Sarah activated the scanner and began taking readings from a distance. The results confirmed her suspicions. Kira's stress hormones were elevated, her heart rate was irregular, and her digestive system showed signs of shutdown, all consistent with severe anxiety and depression. "I believe I know what's wrong," Sarah said, turning to face the matriarch. "But the treatment might require some changes to how the negotiations are conducted." The matriarch's four eyes focused intently on Sarah. "Explain." "Kira is experiencing what we would call separation anxiety and environmental stress disorder. She's not just sick, she's heartbroken. The solution isn't medicine, at least not primarily. She needs to feel connected to you and to have some sense of control over her environment." The room fell silent except for Kira's labored breathing. Sarah realized she was essentially telling one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy that her approach to caring for her companion needed to change. "What do you propose?" the matriarch asked finally. "Short term, we can treat the physical symptoms with mild medications to help her appetite and breathing. But long term, she needs more interaction with you and possibly some modifications to make this environment feel more like home." Sarah paused, knowing her next suggestion was audacious. She might also benefit from having something to do, a purpose. Shadow Maws are intelligent hunters. Being confined with no mental stimulation could be contributing to her depression. The matriarch was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Then, to Sarah's surprise, she smiled, an expression that revealed sharp teeth, but somehow managed to convey warmth. "You're suggesting that my companion is bored as well as homesick?" "In simple terms, yes. The combination of stress factors has triggered a physical illness response. And you believe you can treat this?" Sarah looked back at Kira, who was still watching their conversation with intelligent eyes. The Shadow Maw seemed to sense that important decisions were being made about her welfare. "I believe so, with your cooperation. But it will require a treatment approach that's unconventional by galactic medical standards." The matriarch moved closer to her companion, placing a gentle hand on Kira's head. The Shadow Maw immediately perked up, her coloring shifting slightly toward a healthier hue just from this brief contact. "Very well, human medic. I place my companion's welfare in your hands. What do you need from me?" Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She was about to attempt a treatment protocol that had never been tried on a Shadow Maw, based on human psychological medicine principles. If she was wrong, she could make Kira worse. If she was right, she might revolutionize how alien veterinary medicine approached psychological conditions. "First, I need to establish trust with Kira so I can conduct a more thorough examination. That means spending time with her daily until she's comfortable with my presence." "Granted." "Second, I need to modify her environment to include elements that stimulate her hunting instincts and provide mental enrichment." "What did you have in mind?" Sarah smiled, feeling more confident as her treatment plan took shape. "We're going to give Kira some problems to solve." 3 days into her treatment plan, Sarah had established a routine that amazed everyone on the diplomatic station. Each morning, she would arrive at the matriarch's quarters with a new puzzle or challenge designed specifically for Kira. The Shadow Maw had gone from listless and gray to showing flickers of her natural purple coloring whenever Sarah presented her with a mental exercise. Today's challenge was more ambitious than the previous ones. Sarah had convinced the station's engineers to create a series of hidden compartments throughout the habitat area, each containing a small portion of Kira's favorite food. The Shadow Maw would have to use her natural hunting instincts to locate and access each compartment using different methods. Some required strength, others problem-solving, and a few demanded patience and careful observation. "You have transformed my companion in just a few days," the matriarch said, watching as Kira prowled around the habitat with renewed energy. "Our finest healers worked for weeks with no progress." Sarah monitored Kira's vital signs on her scanner while the Shadow Maw investigated a compartment hidden behind a sliding panel. The creature's stress hormones had dropped significantly, and her appetite was returning to normal levels. More importantly, her emotional state seemed much improved. "Traditional medicine focuses on treating symptoms," Sarah explained. "But sometimes the root cause isn't physical." Kira needed to feel useful and challenged. Shadow Maws are apex predators. Their minds are designed for complex hunting strategies. As if to prove Sarah's point, Kira solved the puzzle compartment by pressing a sequence of pressure plates in the correct order. The compartment opened with a soft chime, revealing a piece of her favorite meat. Instead of eating immediately, Kira looked back at Sarah and the matriarch, her tail swishing in what the database described as a pleased gesture. "She's showing off," Sarah laughed. "She wants us to see how clever she is." The matriarch's expression softened as she watched her companion. "I had forgotten how much Kira enjoys demonstrating her abilities. On our homeworld, she would often solve problems I hadn't even realized existed." Sarah made notes on her data pad, documenting Kira's progress for what she hoped would become a revolutionary approach to treating psychological conditions in alien species. Her success with Kira was already attracting attention from medical professionals throughout the station, and several had requested copies of her treatment protocols. "Excellence," Commander Veltar's voice came through the communication system. "The morning session is about to begin." The matriarch's expression grew serious. The peace negotiations had reached a critical phase, with several species threatening to withdraw if their territorial demands weren't met. Sarah knew the pressure the matriarch was under. The fate of entire worlds depended on these talks succeeding. "I must go," the matriarch said reluctantly. "Kira, be well. I will return soon." Sarah watched the immediate change in Kira's demeanor. The Shadowmaw's ears drooped slightly, and she moved to position herself near the door, clearly wanting to accompany the matriarch. This separation anxiety was still the most challenging aspect of Kira's treatment. "Actually," Sarah said, an idea forming in her mind. "What if Kira didn't have to stay here?" Both the matriarch and Commander Veltar looked at her with surprise. "The negotiations are highly sensitive," Veltar said. "Security protocols prohibit dash. What if Kira had a job during the negotiations?" Sarah interrupted. "Something that would allow her to be near the matriarch while contributing to the station's security." The matriarch's four eyes focused intently on Sarah. "Explain." "Shadowmaws have enhanced senses, correct? They can detect emotional states, identify threats, and process environmental information faster than most security equipment." "This is true," the matriarch confirmed slowly. "But the other delegates would never agree to having a predator in the negotiation chambers." "Not in the chambers," Sarah said, her excitement growing as the plan developed. "But what if she was part of the security detail? She could patrol the areas around the negotiation rooms, providing an additional layer of protection while staying close enough to sense your emotional state." Commander Veltar's expression was skeptical. A Shadow Maw working alongside station security? The other species would view this as an act of aggression. "Not if it was presented as a medical accommodation," Sarah countered. "Kira is a patient under treatment for separation anxiety. Allowing her to accompany the matriarch in a controlled, professional capacity is part of her therapy." The room fell silent as everyone considered this unprecedented suggestion. Sarah could see Kira watching their conversation intently, as if she understood that her future was being decided. "The medical necessity angle might work," the matriarch said thoughtfully, "but Kira would need to demonstrate that she could follow commands and work with alien security personnel. She's already proven she can learn new behaviors rapidly, Sarah pointed out. And she's clearly motivated to stay close to you. Commander Veltar crossed his forearms. A gesture Sarah had learned indicated deep thought among the Velnari. If we were to attempt this, the Shadow Maw would need to pass rigorous behavioral tests. She would have to demonstrate complete obedience to commands, non-aggression toward all species, and the ability to work within established security protocols. How long do we have? Sarah asked. The next critical session begins in 2 days, the Matriarch replied. If these talks fail, several species have indicated they will withdraw from the peace process entirely. Sarah looked at Kira, who was still positioned by the door, clearly hoping to follow the Matriarch. The Shadow Maw's improved health meant she was now alert and energetic, qualities that could either be channeled productively or become problematic if she remained confined. We can do it, Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. But I'll need complete cooperation from station security to develop appropriate protocols. Over the next 6 hours, Sarah found herself in the unusual position of designing a cross-species security training program. Commander Veltar had assigned a team of his best officers to work with her, representing 3 different species that would be present during the negotiations. The first challenge was communication. Kira needed to understand commands given by non-Velnari security personnel, which meant developing a universal command language that would work across species barriers. Sarah decided to use a combination of hand signals, electronic tones, and simple standard galactic words. Officer Zexhai, a crystalline being whose species communicated primarily through harmonic vibrations, was skeptical about the entire project. Predators cannot be trusted, he chimed in his musical language. Their instincts will override training when stress levels rise. That's exactly why this approach might work, Sarah replied through the universal translator. We're not fighting against Kira's instincts. We're channeling them. She wants to protect the Matriarch. We're just teaching her how to do that within our security framework. To demonstrate, Sarah began working with Kira on basic commands. She started with simple concepts the Shadow Maw already understood: sit, stay, come, then gradually introduced more complex instructions. To her delight, Kira seemed to enjoy the mental challenge of learning new commands from different voices and in different languages. Officer HFY, a reptilian being similar to the Kethvar, but with more advanced technology integration, was impressed by Kira's learning speed. The creature processes new information faster than our training simulations predicted, he observed. Her neural adaptability is remarkable. By the end of the first day, Kira could respond to basic security commands from all 3 species officers. More importantly, she showed no signs of aggression toward any of them, instead treating the training as an elaborate game that required her full attention and intelligence. The real test came when they introduced mock scenarios. Sarah had convinced the engineers to create holographic simulations of various security situations that Kira might encounter during the negotiations. These included crowded areas with multiple species, sudden loud noises, and even simulated emergencies. In the first simulation, Kira was asked to patrol a corridor while delegates moved past. The Shadow Maw's natural grace and stealth abilities made her nearly invisible as she moved, and her enhanced senses allowed her to detect the approach of individuals long before the electronic security systems registered them. Remarkable, Commander Veltar murmured as he watched Kira navigate between a group of nervous delegates without causing alarm. She adjusts her behavior based on each species' comfort level. It was true. Sarah watched in fascination as Kira automatically gave the insectoid delegates more space, recognizing their instinctive fear of predators, while moving more confidently around the Velnari officers who were familiar with her species. The Shadow Maw seemed to intuitively understand how to minimize her threatening presence while maintaining her protective capabilities. The second simulation tested Kira's response to potential threats. A holographic intruder appeared in the corridor, moving toward the area where the negotiations would take place. Kira's reaction was swift and controlled. She positioned herself between the threat and the protected area then gave a low warning growl that would alert security without causing panic among nearby delegates. She's not attacking, Officer THYSS noted with surprise. She's following security protocols: identify, warn, position, wait for backup. Shadow Maws are intelligent hunters, Sarah explained. They understand the concept of graduated response. Kira knows that her job is to detect and deter threats, not to eliminate them immediately. The third simulation was the most challenging, a scenario where the Matriarch appeared to be in danger. Kira's emotional response was immediate and intense, her coloring shifting to deep purple as her protective instincts activated. But instead of charging toward the perceived threat, she followed the protocols they had practiced: alert security, position herself defensively, and wait for commands. Impressive, Commander Veltar admitted. But there is one more test she must pass. The final challenge was integration with the station's existing security systems. Kira needed to demonstrate that she could work alongside electronic sensors, automated defenses, and other security measures without interfering with their operation. More importantly, she had to prove that her presence would enhance rather than complicate security operations. Sarah had spent hours studying the station's security layout, identifying areas where Kira's natural abilities could supplement existing measures. Shadow Maws could detect emotional stress through scent and body language, making them living lie detectors. Their enhanced hearing could pick up conversations and sounds that electronic surveillance might miss. And their speed and agility meant they could respond to situations faster than any mechanical system. The integration test took place in a mock-up of the actual negotiation area. All the security measures were active, including motion sensors, atmospheric scanners, and automated response systems. Kira had to patrol the area while these systems were operating, demonstrating that her presence wouldn't trigger false alarms or interfere with normal security protocols. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Not only did Kira avoid triggering any alarms, but her patrol pattern actually improved the overall security coverage. She instinctively moved to cover areas that the fixed sensors couldn't monitor effectively, creating a dynamic security network that adapted to changing conditions. She's thinking like a security officer. Officer Zexhai chimed in amazement. She understands the purpose of each system and works to complement rather than duplicate their capabilities. As the testing concluded, Sarah felt a mixture of pride and nervousness. They had proven that Kira could function as part of the security team, but the real challenge would be implementing this during actual negotiations with the galaxy's most powerful leaders. There is one final consideration, Commander Veltar said as they reviewed the test results. The other delegates must be informed of the Shadow Maw's presence and role. Some may object strongly to a predator being present during sensitive negotiations. Leave that to me, the Matriarch said, having arrived to observe the final tests. I will present Kira's integration as a medical necessity and a security enhancement. Those who object will need to explain why they prefer less security during these critical talks. Sarah watched the interaction between the Matriarch and Kira, noting how much the Shadow Maw's health had improved in just a few days. Her coloring was almost completely restored to healthy purple. Her energy levels were normal, and, most importantly, her separation anxiety was manageable as long as she knew she could accompany the Matriarch. There's something else, Sarah said, pulling up her medical scans on the datapad. Kira's cognitive function has actually improved during this training. The mental stimulation has enhanced her problem-solving abilities and emotional regulation. Meaning what exactly? Commander Veltar asked. Meaning she's not just healthy again, she's healthier than she was when she arrived. The training has provided the mental exercise her species requires for optimal cognitive function. The Matriarch placed a gentle hand on Kira's head, and the Shadow Maw leaned into the contact with obvious contentment. You have given me back my companion and made her stronger than before, she said to Sarah. But more than that, You have shown us new possibilities for cooperation between species. Sarah felt a warmth of accomplishment, but she also recognized that the hardest part was still ahead. Tomorrow, they would present their proposal to the other delegates, and Kira would face her ultimate test, proving that a predator could be trusted to protect rather than threaten. As they prepared to leave the training area, Sarah noticed Kira's behavior had changed subtly. The shadow moved with purpose and confidence, her posture indicating alertness rather than anxiety. She had transformed from a sick, depressed creature into a capable security professional. She knows she has a job to do now, Sarah observed. That sense of purpose is just as important for her psychological health as the proximity to you. The matriarch nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps this is something we should consider for other shadow maws in our care. Many become listless in civilized environments because they lack challenges worthy of their intelligence. As they walked back toward the matriarch's quarters, Sarah reflected on how much her understanding of alien psychology had expanded in just a few days. The principles of human medicine, treating the whole patient, not just symptoms, applied to alien species as well. But adapting those principles required creativity, flexibility, and the willingness to challenge conventional approaches. Tomorrow would determine whether her unconventional treatment methods could survive contact with galactic politics. The emergency session was called at dawn, interrupting what should have been the final preparation for Kira's integration into the security detail. Sarah rushed to the briefing room, her medical bag in hand and her heart racing. Commander Veltar's urgent message had contained only essential details. Critical security situation. Medical consultation required immediately. The briefing room buzzed with tension when Sarah arrived. Representatives from 6 different species clustered around a holographic display showing the station's layout, their voices creating a cacophony of worried conversation in multiple languages. Commander Veltar stood at the center, his 4 arms gesturing as he coordinated response efforts. "What's the situation?" Sarah asked, approaching the command station. "Assassination attempt," Veltar replied grimly. Someone placed a bioweapon in the ventilation system of Conference Room 7. It was designed to target respiratory systems of the Thylar delegation. Sarah felt her blood run cold. The Thylar were crucial to the peace negotiations. Their homeworld controlled shipping lanes that 3 other species needed for trade. If they withdrew from the talks or were eliminated, the entire peace process could collapse in a renewed warfare. "Casualties?" she asked, already reaching for her medical scanner. "None yet." The station's automated systems detected the contaminant and sealed the room before anyone was exposed. But the Thylar delegation refuses to continue negotiations. They believe someone is specifically targeting them for elimination. Sarah studied the holographic display, noting the location of Conference Room 7 relative to the other negotiation areas. "Have you identified the delivery method?" "That's where we need your expertise," Commander Veltar said, highlighting several sections of the ventilation system. The bioweapon appears to be engineered specifically to affect Thylar physiology. It would be harmless to most other species, making it nearly impossible to detect through standard security screening. Someone with detailed medical knowledge planned this, Sarah realized. They would need access to Thylar genetic information and advanced biochemical knowledge to create something so species-specific. Officer THYSS approached their group, his reptilian features grim. The contamination was introduced through a maintenance access point that requires special clearance to reach. Someone with legitimate station access is responsible. The implications hit Sarah immediately. You're looking for someone with both medical expertise and security clearance. That's a very small group of suspects. Exactly, Veltar confirmed. And, unfortunately, that group includes you. Sarah felt the accusatory stares of several delegates as the realization spread through the room. As the only human medical professional on the station with access to detailed xenobiological databases, she was an obvious suspect. Her recent work with alien physiology only strengthened the case against her. "Commander," she said carefully, "I understand why I'm a suspect, but Right now, we need to focus on preventing further attacks. This bioweapon could be deployed in other areas of the station. The Thylar delegation has demanded that all medical personnel be confined to quarters pending a full investigation. Officer Zexhai chimed in his musical language. They refuse to continue negotiations until the threat is eliminated. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. If the medical staff was confined, who would treat any future casualties? More importantly, her confinement would prevent Kira's integration into the security detail, which would trigger the Shadow Maw's separation anxiety and undo all the progress they had made. There might be another approach, she said slowly. What if we use Kira to help identify the perpetrator? The room fell silent. Commander Veltar's 4 eyes narrowed as he considered the suggestion. Explain. Shadow Maws can detect emotional states through scent and body language. If the person responsible is still on the station, Kira might be able to identify them through stress indicators that would be invisible to standard security measures. You're proposing to use a predator as a living lie detector? Officer THYSS asked skeptically. I'm proposing we use her enhanced senses to supplement our investigation, Sarah corrected. Someone who planned an assassination attempt would show specific stress patterns when confronted with evidence of their crime. Kira could detect those patterns. The Matriarch had remained silent during the briefing, but now she stepped forward. There is precedent for this approach, she said in her commanding voice. Shadow Maws have been used in criminal investigations on our homeworld. Their ability to detect deception is remarkable. Commander Veltar studied the holographic display, his expression thoughtful. The Thylar delegation might accept this approach if it meant keeping the negotiations on schedule. But there are risks. What kind of risks? Sarah asked. If Kira incorrectly identifies an innocent person as guilty, it could cause a diplomatic incident. If she fails to identify the real perpetrator, further attacks become likely. And if the perpetrator realizes they're being hunted by a Shadow Maw, they might accelerate their timeline for additional attacks. Sarah understood the weight of the decision. They were essentially betting the entire peace process on an untested investigative technique using a creature that most of the delegates still considered a dangerous predator. There's something else to consider, she added reluctantly. If I'm the primary suspect, my continued involvement in Kira's activities could be seen as an attempt to manipulate the investigation. That is why you will not be working alone, the Matriarch declared. I will personally oversee Kira's investigative work, along with representatives from each delegation. Complete transparency will eliminate any possibility of manipulation. Officer Zexhai's crystalline form shimmered as he processed this information. The Thylar delegation might accept this approach, but they will demand additional security measures. What did you have in mind? Commander Veltar asked. Each suspect, including the human medic, will be assigned a constant security escort. No one with medical knowledge will be allowed unaccompanied access to any critical systems until the perpetrator is identified. Sarah nodded her acceptance of these terms. Being under constant surveillance would be uncomfortable, but it would also protect her from further suspicion and ensure that any evidence Kira uncovered would be considered credible. Very well, Commander Veltar said. Dr. Chun, you will continue your medical duties under escort. The Matriarch will work with our investigation team to develop protocols for using Kira in the identification process. We have 18 hours before the Thylar delegation withdraws from negotiations. As the briefing broke up, Sarah found herself assigned to Officer THYSS as her security escort. The reptilian officer's expression was neutral, but she could sense his professional skepticism about her innocence. Do you believe I'm guilty? She asked as they walked toward the medical bay. I believe in following evidence, Officer THYSS replied. Your expertise makes you a logical suspect, but your behavior during this crisis suggests either innocence or exceptional self-control. Which do you think is more likely? Officer THYSS was quiet for a moment before responding. Someone capable of engineering a species-specific bioweapon would not voluntarily suggest using a Shadow Maw to investigate their own crime. The risk of detection would be too high. Sarah felt some of her tension ease. Having her escort believe in her innocence would make the investigation much more manageable. Thank you for your honesty. They spent the morning reviewing medical records and biological samples, searching for any evidence that might point toward the bioweapon's origin. Sarah's access to the xenobiological databases was now monitored and recorded, but she was still able to conduct her research. What she found was troubling. The bioweapon showed sophisticated understanding of the Ilar respiratory chemistry, but the engineering was crude compared to what she would expect from an experienced biochemist. It looked more like someone with basic medical knowledge had followed a detailed recipe rather than someone who truly understood the science involved. This wasn't created by a medical professional, she told Officer THYSS as they examined the analysis results. The targeting mechanism is brilliant, but the delivery system is amateur work. Meaning what exactly? Meaning someone with advanced knowledge provided the formula, but someone else actually created the weapon. We're looking for at least 2 people, a mastermind with sophisticated understanding of alien biology, and an accomplice with access to laboratory equipment. This revelation complicated the investigation significantly. Instead of searching for a single perpetrator among the medical staff, they now needed to identify a conspiracy involving multiple individuals with different types of access. Meanwhile, across the station, the Matriarch was working with Kira to develop investigation protocols. The Shadowmaw's training had given her experience working with alien species, but using her senses for criminal investigation required different techniques. The first test involved exposing Kira to volunteers who were asked to lie about simple facts while she monitored their stress responses. The results were remarkably accurate. Kira correctly identified deception in over 90% of the test cases, regardless of the volunteer species. More importantly, she could distinguish between general nervousness and the specific stress patterns associated with guilt or fear of discovery. This meant she could potentially identify the perpetrators even in the high-stress environment of a security investigation. By afternoon, they were ready to begin the actual investigation. The suspect list included 12 individuals with a necessary combination of medical knowledge and security access. Each would be interviewed while Kira monitored their responses, with representatives from multiple delegations observing to ensure the process's integrity. The first interview was with Dr. Kellix, a Thylar physician who had access to his species' biological data. The irony of using a Thylar victim's own doctor as a suspect wasn't lost on anyone, but protocol demanded thoroughness. Dr. Kellix entered the interview room calmly, his elongated form moving with the fluid grace characteristic of his species. His 3 eyes showed curiosity rather than concern as he took in the unusual setup. Commander Veltar conducting the interview, while the Matriarch and Kira observed from a nearby position. Dr. Commander Veltar began. You have unrestricted access to Thylar biological databases. Could this information be used to create targeted bioweapons? Theoretically, yes, Dr. Kellix replied without hesitation. But such an act would violate every medical principle I have sworn to uphold. My role is to preserve life, not destroy it. Sarah watched Kira's reactions carefully. The Shadowmaw's posture remained relaxed, her coloring stable, and her tail movements indicated calm attention rather than alertness to deception. Dr. Kellix was telling the truth. The next interview was with Engineer Yaxtol, whose maintenance duties gave him access to the ventilation systems. The insectoid being's compound eyes made his emotional state harder to read through conventional means, but Kira's enhanced senses could detect chemical markers that visual observation might miss. Your work required you to access the maintenance areas where the bioweapon was deployed, Commander Veltar stated. Did you observe any unauthorized activity in those locations? Engineer Yaxtol's antennae twitched nervously. Many beings have access to maintenance areas. I cannot monitor all activities while performing my duties. Kira's ears perked up slightly, and her coloring shifted to a deeper purple. She was detecting stress, but not necessarily guilt. The engineer was nervous about the questioning, but didn't seem to be hiding knowledge of the crime. The interviews continued through the afternoon with similar results. Each suspect showed natural nervousness about being questioned, but none displayed the specific stress patterns that Kira associated with deception about serious crimes. By late afternoon, they had interviewed 10 of the 12 suspects with no positive results. Sarah began to worry that their approach was flawed. Perhaps the perpetrator had already left the station, or maybe their stress control was too sophisticated for even Kira to detect. The 11th interview changed everything. Dr. Helix entered the room with what appeared to be professional confidence, but Sarah noticed subtle signs that suggested carefully controlled anxiety. The doctor was a member of the crystalline species, whose emotional states were typically expressed through harmonic vibrations rather than visual or chemical cues. Dr. Commander Veltar began the standard questions. Your research includes comparative xenobiology. Are you familiar with Ilar respiratory systems? Of course, Dr. Helix replied in carefully modulated tones. Such knowledge is essential for treating patients from multiple species. Kira's reaction was immediate and dramatic. Her entire body went rigid, her coloring shifted to deep purple, and her tail began the rapid twitching that indicated detection of serious deception. She had found their perpetrator. But before anyone could react to Kira's alert, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed as Commander Veltar's communication device activated with an urgent message. Multiple bioweapon deployments detected in conference rooms 3, 5, and 8 came the voice of a security coordinator. All delegations are at immediate risk. The assassination attempt had been a diversion. While they were focused on investigating the first attack, the real assault on the peace negotiations had begun. The station erupted into chaos as emergency protocols activated throughout all levels. Sarah felt her stomach drop as she realized the scope of the attack. 3 different conference rooms meant multiple delegations were simultaneously under threat. Dr. Helix had used their investigation as cover to deploy the real bioweapons while everyone was focused on finding the perpetrator. Containment fields are holding for now, Commander Veltar reported as information streamed through his communication device. But we have delegates trapped in all 3 rooms. The bioweapons are different this time. They're targeting multiple species simultaneously. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. Creating species-specific weapons was difficult enough, but engineering agents that could harm multiple alien physiologies required incredibly sophisticated knowledge. Dr. Helix had been planning this attack for months, possibly years. How long do the containment fields hold? The Matriarch demanded. 12 minutes before they begin to fail, Veltar replied grimly. After that, the contamination spreads to the rest of the station. Kira had remained in alert posture throughout the emergency, her enhanced senses tracking the stress and fear now permeating the station. Her training had prepared her for security situations, but nothing like this scale of crisis. We need to evacuate the trapped delegates, Sarah said, her medical training taking over. But first we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Dr. Helix had remained silent during the emergency response, but now spoke with calm precision that chilled Sarah. The compounds are airborne neurotoxins designed to cause respiratory paralysis in 6 different species. Evacuation without protective equipment would be fatal. You're going to tell us how to neutralize them, Commander Veltar stated, his 4 arms moving to weapons that could stun the crystalline doctor without causing permanent harm. I think not, Dr. Helix replied with disturbing serenity. The peace negotiations have always been doomed to fail. Some conflicts cannot be resolved through compromise. Sarah stared at the doctor in disbelief. You're willing to murder dozens of innocent people to prevent peace? I am preventing a false peace that would only delay inevitable warfare, Dr. Helix corrected. Better to end this now than allow false hope to flourish. The philosophical justification for mass murder made Sarah's blood boil, but she forced herself to focus on immediate medical concerns. Commander, I need access to the bioweapon analysis data. There might be a way to create broad-spectrum antidotes. Dr. Chun, Officer Tichwesis interrupted through the communication system. We have injured personnel in conference room 5. The containment field failed for 30 seconds before backup systems activated. Sarah grabbed her medical bag and started toward the door, then stopped as she realized the impossible situation they faced. She couldn't treat patients in contaminated areas without protective equipment, but the protective equipment would take precious time to deploy while people were dying. Wait, she said, a desperate idea forming. Kira's enhanced physiology. Could she survive in those environments long enough to evacuate casualties? The Matriarch's 4 eyes widened as she understood Sarah's suggestion. Shadow Maws have redundant respiratory systems and accelerated healing. She could potentially survive brief exposure to airborne toxins. You're proposing to send my companion into a death trap, the Matriarch said flatly. I'm proposing that she might be the only one who can save those delegates, Sarah replied. But only if we can figure out how to protect her and give her the tools she needs. Commander Veltar was already accessing station schematics on his display. Emergency medical pods are stored near each conference room. If the Shadow Maw could reach them and initiate evacuation protocols. Kira's training included emergency response procedures, the Matriarch said slowly. She knows how to operate basic rescue equipment. Sarah looked at Kira, whose intelligent eyes seemed to follow their conversation. The Shadow Maw had transformed from a sick, depressed creature into a capable security professional. But this would test her abilities far beyond anything they had prepared for. The decision is yours, Sarah told the Matriarch. But we're running out of time, and Kira might be those delegates' only chance. The Matriarch approached her companion, placing a gentle hand on Kira's head. They seemed to communicate in ways that transcended language, the Shadow Maw's posture shifting to indicate understanding and acceptance of whatever task lay ahead. She will try, the Matriarch said finally, but she will not go alone. Excellence, the contamination zones are too dangerous, Commander Veltar began. Not the contamination zones, the Matriarch clarified. Dr. Helix will accompany her to provide guidance on neutralizing the weapons. Dr. Helix's harmonics shifted to a higher pitch, indicating alarm. I will not assist in undermining my own plan. You will assist, the Matriarch said with cold authority, or you will be placed in the most heavily contaminated room to experience your bioweapons personally. Sarah was amazed by the Matriarch's tactical thinking. By forcing Dr. Helix to accompany Kira, they ensured that the doctor had personal motivation to provide accurate information about neutralizing the weapons. It was ruthless, but necessary. The next few minutes passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah worked with station engineers to create a crude protective system for Kira using modified atmospheric filters designed for maintenance work in hazardous environments. The system wasn't perfect, but it might provide enough protection for brief exposures. Meanwhile, Commander Veltar coordinated evacuation routes and emergency medical stations outside the contaminated zones. The plan was complex and risky. Kira would enter each contaminated area, locate survivors, and guide them to emergency medical pods that could be activated remotely. The pods will provide temporary life support, Sarah explained as they reviewed the rescue protocols. But the delegates will need immediate medical treatment once they're evacuated. Medical teams are standing by, Officer THYSS reported. Dr. Chun, you'll coordinate treatment efforts from the emergency medical stations. As they prepared to implement the rescue plan, Sarah realized that her role had evolved far beyond her original medical duties. She was now coordinating a complex emergency response that could determine whether the peace negotiations survived or collapsed into renewed warfare. Kra, she said, approaching the Shadow Maw who was being fitted with the makeshift protective equipment. You're about to become a hero. The rescue operation began with Conference Room 5, where they had confirmed casualties. Kira moved through the station corridors with fluid grace, her enhanced speed allowing her to cover distances that would have taken human rescuers much longer. Dr. Helix followed reluctantly his crystalline form protected by more sophisticated equipment, but his movements clearly driven by fear rather than cooperation. Sarah monitored their progress through security cameras and communication systems, her heart racing as she watched Kira navigate the hazardous environment. The Shadow Maw's training had prepared her for complex problem-solving under stress, but this situation demanded intuition and adaptability that couldn't be taught. Contact established with survivors in Room 5, Veltar reported. 4 delegates are conscious, but showing symptoms of toxin exposure. 2 are unconscious, but breathing. Through the security feed, Sarah could see Kira working systematically to move the conscious delegates toward the emergency medical pods. The Shadow Maw seemed to understand that time was critical, her movements efficient and purposeful as she guided confused and frightened beings toward safety. Dr. Helix is providing information on symptom progression, Officer THYSS added. The toxins work slowly to allow time for evacuation, but effects become irreversible after 20 minutes of exposure. That meant they had already lost precious time during the initial response. Sarah made rapid calculations of treatment windows as she prepared antidotes based on the limited information Dr. Helix had provided under duress. The first evacuation pod activated successfully, sealing 2 delegates in protective atmosphere, while emergency systems began basic life support. Sarah rushed to the medical station as the pod arrived, her scanner already active to assess the patient's conditions. The delegates were HFY soldiers similar to the one she had treated days earlier, but their symptoms were unlike anything in her medical database. The bioweapon had targeted their respiratory systems with brutal efficiency, causing progressive paralysis that would be fatal without immediate intervention. Starting treatment with general respiratory stimulants and neurological supports, she reported as she worked. But I need more specific information about the toxin composition. Through the communication system, she could hear Dr. Helix reluctantly providing technical details to Commander Veltar. The doctor's cooperation was minimal and grudging, but it was enough to guide Sarah's treatment decisions. Meanwhile, Kira had moved to Conference Room 3, where the Thylar delegation was trapped. These delegates were particularly vulnerable because the bioweapon had been specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in their physiology. The rescue operation became more complex as Kira had to account for the Thylar's unique movement patterns and breathing requirements. She's adapting her rescue techniques for each species. The Matriarch observed with pride as they watched the security feeds. Kira understands that different beings require different approaches. It was remarkable to watch. The Shadow Maw that had been listless and depressed just days earlier was now demonstrating problem-solving abilities that impressed even the station's professional emergency responders. She guided the elongated Thylar through narrow spaces with patience, adjusted her pace to accommodate their different movement capabilities, and even seemed to understand their specific breathing requirements. Second evacuation successful. Officer THYSS reported as another medical pod arrived at Sarah's station. But the Thylar delegates are showing more severe symptoms. The Thylar physiology made them particularly susceptible to the neurological effects of the bioweapon. Sarah found herself treating symptoms she had never encountered, relying on her understanding of general xenobiology and her ability to adapt human medical techniques to alien physiology. Neural activity is dropping rapidly, she reported as she worked on the most severely affected delegate. I need to try an experimental approach. She made the decision to use human neurological stimulation techniques modified for Thylar neural pathways. It was dangerous and untested, but the alternative was watching the delegates die while she followed conservative protocols. The treatment worked. Neural activity stabilized, and the Thylar delegates began showing signs of recovery. Sarah felt a surge of hope. If she could treat the most vulnerable patients successfully, the others had even better chances of survival. Conference Room 8 presented the greatest challenge. The trapped delegates represented 4 different species, each requiring different rescue approaches and medical considerations. Kira had to coordinate a complex evacuation while Dr. Helix provided increasingly reluctant assistance. The crystalline doctor is becoming less cooperative, Commander Veltar warned. He may be hoping that this rescue fails to justify his actions. Sarah felt a cold anger at the thought that someone would sabotage rescue efforts to validate their decision to commit mass murder. Tell him that if any delegates die due to his lack of cooperation, he'll be charged with their murders individually. The threat seemed to motivate Dr. Helix to provide more detailed information about the bioweapon effects and potential treatments. His technical knowledge was sophisticated, but Sarah realized that his understanding of practical medical treatment was limited. He had designed weapons without considering how they might be counteracted. As the final evacuation pods arrived at her medical station, Sarah found herself treating the most diverse group of patients in her career. Each species required different approaches, but the fundamental principles of emergency medicine remained constant: stabilize vital functions, counteract toxic effects, and support the body's natural healing processes. All delegates evacuated successfully, Commander Veltar announced as the last pod sealed. Contamination zones are being neutralized now. Sarah looked up from her patients to see Kira emerging from the final contaminated area, her protective equipment damaged, but her movements still strong and purposeful. The Shadow Maw had accomplished something that would have challenged even the most experienced rescue teams. She had saved lives while adapting to unprecedented challenges. But as Sarah returned to treating her patients, she realized that the medical crisis was only beginning. Dr. Helix's bioweapons had been neutralized, but their effects on the delegates would require ongoing treatment that could last for days or weeks. More importantly, the psychological impact of the attack might be even more difficult to heal than the physical injuries. The peace negotiations that everyone had worked so hard to preserve now faced their greatest test: whether trust could survive when someone had tried to murder the negotiators themselves. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in the main conference hall, watching as representatives from 6 different species signed the most comprehensive peace treaty in galactic history. The ceremony was taking place in the same room where delegates had nearly died from bioweapon attacks, but the atmosphere was one of triumph rather than tragedy. The recovery of the poisoned delegates had taken longer than anyone anticipated. Sarah had spent countless hours developing treatment protocols for toxins that had never existed before, working with medical professionals from multiple species to understand the long-term effects of Dr. Helix's weapons. The process had created an unprecedented level of medical cooperation between former enemies. Dr. Chun, Commander Veltar, approached her observation position, his expression more relaxed than she had seen throughout the entire crisis. The Thylar delegation specifically requested that you be recognized in their statement of gratitude. Sarah felt a warm pride at the acknowledgement, but her attention was focused on Kira, who was positioned near the Matriarch as part of the enhanced security detail. The Shadow Maw had become something of a legend among the station personnel, the predator who had risked her life to save those who had initially feared her. "She's remarkable," Sarah said, watching as Kira's enhanced senses continuously monitored the ceremony for any signs of threat or distress. "I've never seen an animal adapt so quickly to complex responsibilities. The Matriarch tells me that Kira has requested to continue working as part of diplomatic security," Veltar replied with what might have been amusement. "Apparently, she finds the intellectual challenge more satisfying than a life of leisure." The idea of a Shadow Maw making career decisions amused Sarah, but it also represented something profound about the relationships that could develop between species when fear was replaced by understanding. Kira's transformation from patient to partner had demonstrated possibilities that none of them had imagined. As the ceremony continued, Sarah reflected on how much her own role had evolved. She had come to the station as a simple medic hoping to prove that human medical knowledge could contribute to galactic healthcare. Instead, she had become part of a diplomatic revolution that was changing how species interacted throughout this sector of the galaxy. Dr. Chun, the Matriarch's voice interrupted her thoughts. The imposing leader approached with her characteristic grace, but her expression held warmth that hadn't been there during their first meeting. "I wanted to thank you personally for what you accomplished. I was just doing my job. Excellence." "No," the matriarch corrected gently. "You did far more than your job required. You saw possibilities where others saw only problems. You trusted in cooperation where others assumed conflict was inevitable." Sarah looked back at Kira, who seemed to sense their conversation, and turned her intelligent gaze toward them. "I think Kira taught us all something about the potential for unexpected partnerships." "Indeed, and that lesson has implications beyond this station." The matriarch gestured toward the signing ceremony, where delegates were taking turns with the ceremonial documents. Each signature represented not just an end to warfare, but a commitment to the kind of collaborative problem-solving that had made the peace process possible. The medical cooperation that developed during the bioweapon crisis has continued beyond the emergency, the matriarch explained. Species that have been enemies for generations are now sharing medical knowledge and research. The treatment protocols you developed are being studied throughout the galaxy. Sarah hadn't fully considered the broader implications of her work during the crisis. She had been focused on saving lives and solving immediate problems, but those solutions had created new frameworks for cooperation that extended far beyond medicine. "There's something else," the matriarch continued. "Several delegations have requested that similar medical exchanges be established on their homeworlds. They want human doctors to work alongside their medical professionals, bringing your approach to collaborative problem-solving to their healthcare systems." The offer was both exciting and daunting. Sarah had proven that human medical principles could adapt to alien physiology, but implementing that knowledge on a galactic scale would require resources and expertise far beyond what she could provide alone. "I would be honored to participate," she said carefully, "but I'm just one person. What you're describing would require institutional support, which is why the delegations have formally requested that Earth be invited to join the Galactic Medical Consortium," the matriarch revealed. "Your homeworld would become a full partner in galactic healthcare, with human medical professionals working throughout known space." Sarah felt the weight of this revelation. Earth had been requesting membership in galactic organizations for decades, but had always been considered too primitive and underdeveloped to contribute meaningfully. Her work with Kira and the bioweapon crisis had apparently changed that perception. "The invitation will be extended officially once the peace treaty is finalized," the matriarch continued. "But the delegations wanted you to know that your efforts here made it possible." As if sensing the importance of the moment, Kira approached their group with her characteristic fluid grace. The Shadow Maw's coloring was the healthy purple that indicated contentment, and her posture suggested confidence and purpose. She had found her place in this complex galactic community. Sarah knelt to Kira's level, remembering the sick, depressed creature she had first encountered. "You've come a long way," she said softly. Kira's response was to gently nuzzle Sarah's hand, a gesture of affection that would have been unthinkable during their first meeting. The Shadow Maw had learned to trust not just the matriarch, but the broader community of beings who shared her environment. "She wants to thank you as well," the matriarch translated. "Shadow Maws have excellent memories. She will remember what you did for her throughout her entire life." The formal signing ceremony was concluding, with each delegation making brief statements about their commitment to the peace process. When the Thylar representative spoke, he specifically mentioned the medical cooperation that had developed during the crisis, crediting it with demonstrating that former enemies could work together effectively. Officer Futuristic, who had served as Sarah's escort during the investigation, approached as the ceremony wound down. "Dr. Chun, I wanted to apologize for my initial suspicions during the crisis." "You were doing your job," Sarah replied. "In a situation like that, everyone had to be considered a potential threat. Perhaps, but I learned something important about judgment and assumption," the officer continued. "The human approach to medicine, treating symptoms while addressing underlying causes, applies to more than just healthcare. Our entire investigation became more effective when we started looking at the broader context rather than focusing only on immediate evidence." It was an insight that pleased Sarah more than any formal recognition. The principles that guided human medicine, holistic thinking, adaptability, and collaborative problem-solving, had proven valuable in contexts far beyond their original application. As the delegations began to disperse, Sarah found herself wondering what would come next. The invitation to join the Galactic Medical Consortium represented opportunities she had never imagined, but it also meant leaving behind the station and colleagues who had become like family during the crisis. The decision doesn't have to be made immediately, the matriarch said, apparently reading her expression. But I hope you'll consider the possibilities. The galaxy needs more beings who can see past conventional limitations to find innovative solutions. Commander Veltar joined their group as the last of the ceremony attendees departed. Dr. Chun, there's one more matter to discuss. The investigation into Dr. Helix revealed that he was part of a larger conspiracy to disrupt peace negotiations throughout this sector. Sarah felt a chill at this news. Are there other threats we should be concerned about? The conspiracy has been neutralized, Veltar assured her. But the investigation revealed something else. The other conspirators specifically targeted this station because they believed the peace negotiations would fail without effective medical support for the delegates. They underestimated the human factor, the matriarch added with what might have been pride. They expected conventional medical approaches to be insufficient for treating multi-species casualties. They didn't anticipate adaptive thinking and collaborative problem-solving. The implication was sobering. Sarah's presence on the station hadn't been coincidental. It had been both a target and a solution that the conspirators hadn't anticipated. Her success in treating the bioweapon victims had prevented the collapse of negotiations that might have resulted in renewed warfare across multiple star systems. How many lives were saved? Sarah asked quietly. Directly? The delegates who were poisoned and recovered fully, Commander Veltar replied. Indirectly? The peace treaty prevents conflicts that could have affected billions of beings across dozens of worlds. As they talked, Sarah noticed that Kira had positioned herself where she could monitor all the exits to the conference hall, even though the ceremony was over and no threats were present. The Shadow Ma had internalized her security responsibilities so completely that vigilance had become second nature. She really has found her calling, Sarah observed. As have you, the matriarch replied. The question now is whether you're ready to embrace the larger role that calling implies. Later that evening, Sarah sat in her quarters reviewing the formal invitation documents that had been delivered by diplomatic courier. The language was ceremonial and complex, but the essential message was clear. Earth was being offered full membership in galactic institutions that had previously been closed to human participation. The success of her unconventional medical approaches had apparently convinced the galactic community that humans could contribute valuable perspectives to problems that had seemed unsolvable. But accepting the invitation would mean leaving behind everything familiar to work in environments she couldn't imagine. A soft chime indicated someone requesting entry to her quarters. Sarah opened the door to find the matriarch and Kira waiting in the corridor. I hope we're not intruding, the matriarch said. Kira seemed restless, and I thought she might want to visit you. Please come in, Sarah replied, noting how Kira immediately began exploring her quarters with curious interest. The Shadow Ma had never seen her personal living space, and her enhanced senses were clearly processing new information about Sarah's lifestyle and preferences. She's trying to understand you better, the matriarch explained, watching her companion's behavior. Shadow Maws form complex mental models of individuals they consider important. She's updating her understanding of who you are beyond your professional role. Sarah was touched by the idea that Kira considered her important enough to study so carefully. She sat on her couch, and Kira approached to settle nearby, close enough to maintain connection, but respectful of personal space. I've been thinking about the invitation, Sarah said. It's an incredible opportunity, but it would mean leaving behind everything I know. Change is always challenging, the matriarch agreed. But Consider what you've accomplished here by embracing uncertainty. You treated a patient from a species you'd never encountered, using techniques that had never been tested. You developed emergency protocols during a crisis that threatened everything we were working toward. You succeeded because you were willing to think beyond conventional limitations. Sarah looked at Kira, who seemed to be listening to the conversation with intelligent attention. "What do you think?" she asked the Shadow Maw. "Should I take on challenges I'm not sure I can handle?" Kira's response was to move closer and rest her head against Sarah's leg, a gesture of trust and affection that spoke volumes about the bonds that could form between different species when fear was replaced by understanding. "I think she's telling you that uncertainty is manageable when you have trusted companions," the Matriarch interpreted. Kira faced challenges she'd never imagined during the bioweapon crisis, but she succeeded because she wasn't facing them alone. As they sat together in comfortable silence, Sarah realized that her decision had already been made. The principles that had guided her medical career, helping those who needed care regardless of the complexity of their conditions, applied just as clearly to this larger opportunity. She would accept the invitation to help establish human participation in galactic medicine. She would work to develop the collaborative approaches that had proven so successful during the crisis. And she would continue to demonstrate that solutions to impossible problems could emerge when different species worked together toward common goals. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges she couldn't imagine, but it was also full of possibilities for the kind of cooperative problem-solving that had saved lives and prevented wars on this station. Looking at Kira, who had transformed from a sick, depressed creature into a confident professional, Sarah felt optimistic about her own transformation. If a predator could become a healer, perhaps a simple medic could become something more significant in the complex web of galactic civilization. The future was uncertain, but, as Kira had demonstrated, uncertainty could be the beginning of remarkable achievement.